That's going to be a pain in the butt. All right, so I guess we'll have to use this microphone-y thing, huh? Come on, microphone-y thing. There. Yeah, I'm going to knock things over with the cord. That's why I moved it where it was.
Now it's
even better.
Get that laptop.
All right, so welcome to our talk. So we, Hack My Derby. Hi, I'm Nate Lager.
Robert Santillo.
Wait for your slide.
Yes, sir.
So I've never presented at Derbycon before, so I figured introductions were in order. This is me. I'm assistant administrator at Lafayette College. Also half of the partnership, which is the other guys hosting. Also a father, hacker, tinkerer, jeeper, builder, beer drinker, which is why I'm here, not really for the conference. And lots of other things. Jack of all trades. I know a little bit about a lot of things. So then there's this guy over here.
Hi, my name is Rich. I'm a desktop engineer at Lafayette College. I also teach Arduino at Northampton Community College at the Fab Lab. I'm also a technical writing consultant, and I'm a recovering physicist. That's what that little MS up there means. I am also a father. I'm a maker. I have quite the collection of tools that continues to grow, and I'm always looking to learn stuff, which is why I'm here. And yes, the beer drinking sort of goes without saying at this point.
So why are you guys here is the good question. So we built something cool, and you didn't. Or maybe you did. I don't know. We're surrounded by a lot of talented people here. I didn't want to offend anybody. What the heck did we build? Well, it's a tiny data center in a hat is the best way I can describe it. Why would somebody do that? Well, because we're at Derbycon. Because we're hackers. Because it sounded like it would be hard to do. And that's the sort of thing that I like. And because it sounded like it would be fun, because it would be hard to do. And, so last year when the Hack Your Derby competition came about, this is exactly what we had envisioned. And what we saw at the conference was not quite that. But, we saw derbies with wings, derbies with lights. We didn't see any derbies with compute inside. So we decided to build that. Then we found out the competition wasn't on this year. So that really sort of, well, whatever. A little disappointed there. So get on with it. So the basics. What's the idea here? We had to figure out. This is basically a list of what we had to figure out to try to put a data center in a hat. Form factor. Obviously, we got to fit it inside of a hat, which is sort of a challenge. We have to figure out how to let people connect to it, and I'll get back to that in a moment because you'll wonder why you need to connect to my hat. Power, obviously these things need to run on our heads, self-contained for at least, most of the day at the conference. We need to figure out what we're going to put, or how we're going to wear it all day. Has to be comfortable enough that it's not going to give us headaches and brain cancer. And then platform, we needed to figure out what sort of compute we can put inside of a hat that's going to be viable. We need to figure out flags because there's actually a CTF in here. It's not just, an access point that you guys can try to get into. Had to figure out how to get scores to our external scoreboard, which exists. You'll hear about that later too. And we wanted a display on the side to do something with. The original thought was that that's where the scoreboard would be, but that didn't look realistic once we started looking at displays. That's how we ended up with such a small display. So for form factor, we decided to go with a Raspberry Pi A+, mainly because they're tiny. They don't take a lot of power. They're not very expensive. And, I can run Linux on it. And I'm a Linux sysadmin, so that's perfect. I'm at home there. We can power it over USB, which just about every battery you can buy on the market has the ability to plug into a USB, every portable battery anyway. And we can plug in USB peripherals. So obviously the thing needed wireless, so we thought, what better way to connect wireless than just get a wireless adapter and plug it right in. So connectivity. We decided to go with an OurLink USB Wi-Fi adapter, mainly because that was what Adafruit had recommended for compatibility with Raspbian and with the Raspberry Pi A. I'm using host APD to stand up an access point, and of course all the goodies that go along with that, a DHCP server and whatnot. So off to Rich.
Sure. Okay, so we had a few goals, knowing that it was Derbycon and that we'd be getting up at 8 a.m. and going to sleep maybe at like 3 a.m. We needed like 16 hours of runtime because, of course, we're going to wear the hats the entire time. It needed to be lightweight because, once again, we're wearing the hats the entire time and not cook our heads. Same reason. And we need to be able to recharge it within 6 hours because when you're getting up at 8 and going down at 3, 4, or 5, there's not a heck of a lot of recharge time. So what did we end up with? We actually ended up doing better than we had been trying for. When we actually measured the current draw of our entire stack, display, Wi-Fi adapter, Raspberry Pi, we were getting 300 milliamps draw, which was like, wow, that's better than we thought. And we stuck a 20,000 milliamp hour advertised battery in there that you can get like $1 an amp hour nowadays on these batteries. It's like this was a $19 battery off of Amazon. It was great. And we're getting approaching 30 hours of runtime. So, which is just a little bit, which is good because it actually doesn't charge very fast, hence the cheap battery. So even in 6 hours, we didn't get back everything that we had used the previous 16. So it's a good thing we have this sort of buffer of extra runtime in there. Okay, so regarding comfort, there is some room in a Derby, but you're putting everything up on top. So you've got this battery sort of floating around on top of your head, and it's kind of heavy. So the center of mass is, it's sort of up there. So that's a little different. There's no room for fancy mounting. We had this gorgeous design for this structured, like we got this thermoplastic we were going to shape around the battery and use standoffs and mount the Raspberry Pi. And then I started mocking it up in cardboard and going, where's my head going to go? All right, that's not going to work. So we hot glued all the things, or I hot glued all the things. His looks beautiful inside. Mine's just like everything's just globbed in there, and it's mostly secure. And we were trying to avoid sort of, word to the wise, get a really good bond with your hot glue, or after a couple of days of wearing it, the big globs of hot glue start to like just fall off in your hand. You go, oh, my battery's loose and balancing on my head now. That's great. But belt and suspenders, right? So there's also actually a fishing line truss in there in case the hot glue lets go. And he actually didn't glue his battery in. We did this thing where we used about a 10 gauge wire ring in the top, and by chance, the battery happened to like snap right in there on his hat. So he just got that like snapped in, and the hot glue, the fishing line, right? Sort of as a secondary safety net. Yeah, literally a safety net. So we were trying to avoid walking around all day with the battery just sitting on your head because that you get a headache. That's you.
All right, so platform, we went with Raspbian and Wheezy because we wanted to run Docker on top of it so that we could containerize all of our flags, which Docker on a Raspberry Pi is something I didn't know anyone had ever done before. I didn't even consider it when I first started this, and then I just had this idea while I was trying to figure out how to put services on my host, because I only have one host. This isn't a CTF where I've got a rack of servers. I have one host to deal with. I needed some way to protect all those services from anybody who wanted to try to actually be malicious and maybe break out of the service or whatnot. After all, I'm opening this up for you guys to try to break into. I'm a sysadmin. I feel like I'm good at my job. I'm not that good. Nobody's that good to walk into a conference full of 2,000 hackers with your services running directly on your host, and then expect that no one's going to be able to break out of that and just destroy your stuff. So Docker, it containerizes all of the services. I've got one service per Docker container. If you were to say break out of Apache, you would be inside of a container, which, sure, if you're smart enough, you could probably find a way to break out of that too, but it's another layer of defense, and that's what I was going for. So, flags. What's a CTF without flags? So we put the flags inside of Docker containers. Each flag will give you code. I compare this to if you were to open up a soda bottle and get a code under the cap. Exact same scenario, except it's coming from my Derby. After you get the code, you take it and enter it into Scoreboard, which is the scoreboard. So we decided to host it on Red Hat's OpenShift Online because, hey, that's also based on containers, and we have a theme going. I also wanted to try out the service because it's something we've been considering for a while at the college. And that's, I figured this is a great way to test my feet in this, and Docker as well, because Docker is something I've been interested in for a while. So the codes, you get a code, you write it down, you take a picture of it, whatever you want to do. Then at your convenience, you go and connect to the scoreboard, and you put in your code and your name, and then you end up on the scoreboard. Scores are tallied based on values that we set earlier. All right, Rich, OLED.
So we're going to talk about the OLED on a few different slides. So the OLED we used, first of all, we used an OLED rather than an LCD because it uses about a third of the power, and we were really concerned about runtime, and we did good there. So it's a 16:2 character OLED from Adafruit. We're using a parallel interface. It can actually, in theory, be wired up in different ways to use different interfaces like SPI. We'll get to the practicalities of that in a couple slides.
Now we move on to the stuff that was difficult to do, as if this wasn't difficult to begin with. So Docker itself, again, like I said, there wasn't just a package that I could just go and say, hey, Raspbian, run me some Docker. I'm used to the Red Hat world where it's a quick yum install to get just about any software that I want. I am definitely familiar with the world of building software from source. I've been doing Linux since 1996 or so, before packages were really the way that most software was distributed. So anyway, I found a source package that someone had already compiled or modified to run against Raspbian Wheezy. I basically followed his directions, and it was pretty simple. There were a few little tricks and jumps, and I intend to document that a little better. I'll be releasing most of the details about exactly how all this stuff worked in a blog entry later. If you follow our Twitter handle @HackTheDerby, I'll announce it there once it's up and ready. It might be a week or two after the conference is over. Got to give me time to write it. So the other big issue here. So when I first thought of this, the design process for this thing went through a number of iterations. Originally, I thought that instead of collecting codes and putting them into the scoreboard, that actually you would trigger something and it would report to the scoreboard. Well, that becomes problematic because the scoreboard's not on the hat. You have to be able to get to the internet to get to the scoreboard. How I was going to do that in a conference where wireless signal and everything are untrustworthy at best and unusable sometimes was sort of a problem. That and how would I get you guys into the hat? I'd have to run 2 wireless adapters, which means more power draw, which means I have to try to keep the 2 adapters, in a state where they're usable, and it just seemed like a whole lot of effort. So instead, we went with the code model that I described earlier. And the oh my freaking LED.
Yeah. So power consumption aside, we needed to use the OLED. It had to be an OLED. I actually really wanted e-paper, but I couldn't find anything usable. And aside, if anyone knows a good supplier for e-paper screens that you might be able to connect to a Raspberry Pi, I'm at SunkThought on Twitter. Please just tweet me and tell me where to get that stuff for next year. That'll be great. So, all right, the OLED. Okay, so as with a lot of different components that are able to talk over different kinds of buses, the way to switch between the protocol that it communicates on is there's these little tiny surface mount resistors on the back, and you desolder them and move them to a different location and solder them back on. And we had the datasheet that Adafruit supplied for the OLED, and I followed it and said, okay, we want to use SPI because driving an SPI display from a Raspberry Pi is actually a pretty well-documented thing that people do. There's like YouTube videos on it. This is great. And even though an OLED has the same 16 pins as an LCD, it's not exactly the same. There's obviously no backlight on an OLED, but there's also this thing called wait while it's busy that an LCD just doesn't have. You just send commands at it and it does it, and OLED says, oh, you sent me a command, but tough, I'm busy, I'm ignoring you, or worse yet, I'm going to throw garbage on the display now. So you need a good library, and there weren't any good libraries out there for parallel OLED connection to Raspberry Pi. So solder it all up, and it doesn't work. Okay, start looking around. Some guy had this German website where he had said, oh, I got it working, da-da-da-da, and he says, here's how I did it, and what he described didn't match the photos that he posted. He had the resistors moved all weird places that didn't match what was on the data sheet, and okay, this doesn't work. Put it back in parallel. We find some guy who wrote a library, and he hadn't updated on his GitHub in 2 years, and it was I'm not a big Python guy, but even when I was looking at his code, it was like, ooh, this is kind of janky. So We did all that, and we've got a great guy who's great with Python, Carl Walbeezer at Lafayette. He just said, "Oh, I just read the data sheet and I wrote you a new library. Here it is, and it works great." so I desoldered everything that I had moved around and put it back to parallel mode and used Carl's library, and now we've got like Pac-Man running across, like eating the letters and everything, and it's fabulous. It works wonderfully. So thanks, Carl. So what did we display? That's you.
That's me. So one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of the talk, if you connect to my Derby and there's an IP address of 10.42.0.13 where a website runs, the slides for the presentation have been hosted on the Derby during the presentation. If you want the slides, you can get them now. I figured I'd do something fun since I'm standing here presenting with a remotely accessible data center. So, why did we want the display? So, I mean, putting all this inside of a hat without an external display, nobody would see it. They would just say, "Oh, look, you've got a Derby on. You're at Derbycon." Well, we wanted to stand out a little bit, so we thought the display would be a perfect way to do that. And then we, of course, built it in so that there's cases where one of the flags, you can actually write a message to the display, free form, as long as it's 16 characters or less. I realized I was opening myself up to a lot of embarrassment by letting the entire con control the display. It seems like only 2 people have gotten into it, and they happen to be friends of ours. So I guess not as many people were interested as we had hoped. The other thing it displays, and this is more or less just for fodder for things to display while nobody has actually claimed control of the Derby. Whenever somebody joins via their mobile device, it'll display the host name that joined. I don't know if that's happened at all while we've been talking or not, but you may have seen that happen. And then, of course, there's just this advertise loop that if nothing else is happening, you'll see that going right now. It displays a couple of messages that have sort of funny tidbits from previous cons, where to find our scoreboard, what our Twitter handles are, things like that. What the SSID is to join the hat, so that's important as well. So the CTF itself, so what does it consist of? 2 derbies, each of them are on their own SSID, about 587 possible points. I really didn't know how to judge the points, so I just sort of threw things in there as I thought the challenge was. Each hat is slightly different, though they run similar services. So you can't just get through one of them and then do the same thing on the other and get twice the points. There's actually some on Rich's that are a little more complicated than mine. There's a really interesting one on mine that I'll go into if we have time at the end of the talk. So the CTF consists of, on my Derby, it's got 4 containers. On his, it only has 3. So there's a Samba share, there's an SSH server, there's a web server, and there's a circle mud. No response at all? Come on. So a lot of what got me into the IT industry was in my younger days. I was a big BBS fan. A lot of Telnet muds and whatnot. So this was one of the first containers I tried to build as sort of a proof of concept. What can I put in a container? And I built a circle mud inside of a container. And after I built it, I thought, what the hell? I'll throw it onto the Derby and maybe somebody will find it and have fun. I later worked it into the CTF. You can actually social engineer a bot that runs around in the circle mud. So, codes and scoreboard. I sort of already talked on this. Here's a freebie. Quick, take a picture. These are what the codes look like. I decided to do things in a way that would prevent code reuse from, say, Keith here got a code and he's on the scoreboard trying to enter it, and someone just looks over his shoulder and grabs his code and then tries to claim the same flag Keith did. It won't work. Once Keith has entered it, this code is no longer valid. This code is reusable because it's in the slide, and obviously I can't have as many slides as there are people in the room here. So basically, the first half of the code identifies what gate you've passed, and that's how we figure out how many points to give you. The second half of the code is random. We generated several thousand random codes, split it in half, put half on each derby, and then put all the codes up on the scoreboard. Whenever the derby gives you a code, it then deletes it from its database. And whenever you claim a code on the scoreboard, it deletes it from its database. So there should never be a case where 2 people have received the same code, unless it's a special code like this one, or there's one other that's static. So Two others. I'm sorry. You had one that you had built. So this is what the scoreboard looks like. I don't know how well you can see it way in the back. Basically, our web development team at the college, we tapped their resources to build these things because, again, I could have written a scoreboard. It would have been ugly. I'm not a web developer. So this is, again, it's all based on a framework called Silex. It uses Twig. This is what our web guys were trying to learn, so they used it as a reason to get themselves into this new templating system. Whatever, it looks nice. There's also, on the scoreboard, there's the rules and what the project is about and whatever. All right, so we're at pretty much the end of the slides. I wanted to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, Lafayette College, who we both work for, were kind enough to pay for all of the components, give us time to work on these things because they thought it was a neat project. And, of course, it gets the school's name out there a little bit. If you want to do cool things, come to Lafayette College. So Charles and Tim, they're our web guys. They're the ones that are responsible for building that scoreboard. Tim actually wrote it, but then he went on vacation, and there were some things that needed to be changed, so Charles finished it up for us. Charles is also here, but he didn't come to the talk because we're not important enough to him. Carl, of course, who is the guy who wrote our library, and Keith right here was kind enough to go through and sort of beta test a lot of our flags and let us know if we were completely crazy and that these things were going to be just decimated or if it was even fun to participate. And he gave us some great feedback. And most of all, thanks to Derbycon and for actually letting us present this, and thanks to all of you for showing up to our talk, because that's just awesome that you showed up, especially this early on a Sunday after all the partying that went on last night. And that's it. Here's how you can get a hold of us. This is part of Carl's demo loop. We thought it was perfect for the last slide in the in the presentation. So I did want to, if you guys want to stick around and hear about any of the more interesting flags, either we can meet in the hall and chatter, or I can answer questions or whatever you want. Yeah, so I guess we'll do questions first. Anybody have any questions about anything in this crazy thing? Yes.
How much does it cost per hat?
How much did it cost per hat? I was actually thinking about this. I was running a nice spreadsheet, but then as these things go, there was a ton of parts we bought that we didn't even use.
Don't tell Lafayette that.
Don't tell Lafayette that. So, like, we bought this thermal plastic that we were going to build this cool framework to build, to put the Derby, or put inside the Derby that held the battery and the Pi and the little USB hub that's in there. And it just wouldn't fit. We just, we had all these great plans. Oh, yeah, there's like this awesome laser cutter at the college. We're going to use that. It'll cut it perfect. Then we'll just heat it up and... Yeah, none of it would fit. The extra 1/4 inch that it added, top and 1/8 inch top and bottom, so 1/4 inch total to the battery was just too much. We couldn't fit it. So in the end, the stuff that actually ended up in the Derby, we're probably talking between $200 $250. That's including the Derby, all the components, the cheap little battery, cheap enormous battery we bought. Yeah, so you could build this yourself, and honestly, might be able to build it cheaper without the constraints of trying to put it inside of the hat. So if you were just trying to build this as like a thing to sit in your house or a thing to carry around in a bag or something, it would be a little cheaper because you wouldn't be as constrained as we were.
The OLED by itself is $30. So
yeah, I mean the Pi was $30, the OLED was $30, and I don't think any other component exceeded $30.
the battery was $20. Like those are the big ticket items.
Yeah.
There's a cheap little USB hub in there actually.
Yeah, and then miscellaneous cables and whatnot. It adds up, but yeah, it's not expensive. Anything else? No other questions?
I haven't actually seen the inside of this thing. You actually have a picture of what it looks like.
So there's not a picture.
Can I see the inside of your hat?
Well, yeah, obviously I can take it off and show you guys, but you'll have to come up and see it.
There's also on Nate's Twitter, I believe he posted, or actually on Hack the Derby.
Hold this.
On Hack the Derby's Twitter a while back, I believe we posted a picture of the inside of Nate's hat, which he can show you here.
So I don't know who can see this from way back there, but here's the battery, big old huge looking thing. This is the back of the display, and here's the Raspberry Pi over on the side here. And then above the battery, there's this. We bought a cheap USB hub that was meant for plugging into your laptop or whatever. The key was it's powered. So what we wanted to do was get steady power to the Wi-Fi adapter because we had read that some people had issues with the power supply coming from the Pi. And last thing we wanted was for the Wi-Fi adapter to not have enough power because we had no idea how many people were going to hit this thing. I mean, I set up DHCPD with 65,000 IP leases because I had no idea what you guys were going to do to it. So anyway, we bought that little adapter, little USB hub, and then we just pulled the case off of it, and it's like the size of a stick of gum with some USB ports stuck to the top of it. So that's above the battery in this little dome shape on top of the hat. That's where that fit, and that's where the Wi-Fi adapter is. So, yeah.
And for the record, the soldering on the actual USB hub, the cheap little USB hub, might as well have been stuck on with gum as well. We had to redo that. It was like pulling itself out.
So, as far as some of the flags I'm most proud of, the circle mud, I mean, that's cool. You can actually... there's basically this user that lets you get into the SSH container. You get to figure out their password. Right, so I left on the Samba share. There's some documents laying around that you could theoretically figure out a profile of this guy and try to build his password. But the easy way is you go into the mud and you ask him. There's a 1 in 3 chance he'll actually give you his password. And if he doesn't give you his password, he gets freaked out and runs away. So that was a fun one. I thought it was fun to build that in. I don't know how many of you actually intend to actually try to break into the hat after this talk, but the conference is almost over. I don't mind giving away some of the secrets. There's also there's one where we used one of the codes builds a QR code on the fly. That was kind of a last-minute addition. Rich has one hidden in an image somewhere that's on his Samba share. What other kind of awesome things did we do?
Read the websites. They're just funny.
Oh, yeah. If you get a chance and you're in range of us for long enough, connect and just look at the websites that Rich made. I mean, the layout is the same as a scoreboard. We just basically ripped it, made it static, and put in static HTML content because we had to have something in there to make it look like a website. Otherwise, it was just like, hey, here's a website. Here's your code. And that was kind of dumb. So yeah, Rich put in a whole bunch of dummy content about this corporation called Derbycorp, and about how they make data centers in hats, and how they feel that they're more secure because they're always on the move, and Wi-Fi has a limited range, so you don't need to worry about firewalls and whatnot. Just move out of range, you're fine. It's a really, really, really fun read if you want something to occupy a little bit of time. So. Oh yeah, yep.
You've been on there.
You've been on the beta sites, man. So that was the idea. These were 2 sites in a corporation, the alpha site and the beta site. That's where we got the SSIDs. There's a if you look on my Samba share, there's a bunch of like HR documentation. One of them is this letter from their network engineer talking about how he's going to build this ultra secure network between the 2 Derbys, and he's going to air gap them, and then he's going to use a certain protocol that I'm not going to tell you because it's funnier if you figure it on your own to get data in between the two Derbys, which doesn't exist. It's pretty hilarious, though, I think. So.
Regarding the boy band, that was not just a fever dream of mine. When we took the pictures and we're both staring off into space, I'm like, that looks like an album cover from a boy band. This needs to show up somewhere. So, but there's apparently, if you read the sites on the 2 hats, there seems to be some friction at Derbycorp. So the worldwide headquarters at Derbycorp Alpha is saying, they got all the most brilliant minds there, and of course, the folks, the research and development, Derbycorp Beta, we're thinking of outsourcing them, right? So that's there's a little bit of friction going on at Derbycorp. We'll see what happens if they get their next products out. Project Lincoln, a cluster in a stovepipe hat. It'll be a good time.
So my laptop seems to have forgotten how to let me join a wireless network because the icon is missing because of the tiny screen. I was going to show you guys the site, but I can't. I don't want to waste your time while I fiddle around with Mac OS trying to get connected to the Derby's wireless. But I figure we'll spend some time out in the lobby, or we can just talk in the hallway if anybody has any more questions. Thank you very much for coming to the talk.